In 1970, the smallest and most financially fragile car company in America built a muscle car that had no business existing. It came from a manufacturer most people associated with cheap, sensible economy cars, built by a company that was constantly one bad sales year away from disappearing entirely. And yet, on a drag strip, in period road tests, it beat cars from General Motors and Ford that cost about the same money and carried infinitely more brand prestige. This is the story of the 1970 AMC Rebel Machine, the car nobody expected anything from, that ended up embarrassing the giants anyway. To understand how strange this actually is, you first have to understand what American Motors Corporation even was, because most people today have barely heard of it. AMC wasn't one of Detroit's big three. It wasn't Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler. It was formed in the mid-1950s out of the merger of two struggling independent automakers, Nash Kelvinator and Hudson, companies that couldn't survive on their own against the industry giants and hoped combining forces might at least buy them time. AMC's entire business strategy from day one was built around a simple idea. Since they couldn't outmuscle the majors on marketing budgets or dealer networks, they'd try to offer solid, practical, safety-conscious cars at a price point below what GM, Ford, and Chrysler charged. It worked well enough to keep the company alive for years. It also meant AMC spent most of the 1960s known for compact, sensible cars, the kind your accountant might drive, not the kind anyone raced. And here's why that matters so much for this story. By the mid-1960s, something had shifted in American car culture, and AMC was watching it happen from the sidelines with no answer of their own. No factory racing program worth mentioning, and nowhere near the advertising budget its rivals were throwing at the problem. In 1964, Pontiac released the GTO, and it's often credited, at least in popular memory, with kicking off the modern muscle car era. The idea of dropping a genuinely big, powerful engine into a mid-size car and selling it to ordinary buyers who wanted something that could win at a stoplight. Once that idea caught on, it spread through Detroit like wildfire. Chevrolet had the Chevelle SS, Oldsmobile had the 442, Plymouth had the Roadrunner and GTX, Dodge had the Charger and Super Bee, Ford had the Mustang and later the Torino Cobra. Every single one of these cars came from a company with deep pockets, established racing programs, and decades of performance reputation to lean on. And every single one of them was a direct threat to steal away exactly the kind of young, performance-hungry customer that AMC desperately needed if it wanted to survive into the next decade. Picture the position AMC was actually in. While General Motors could spread the cost of a new performance engine across 5 different divisions and hundreds of dealerships, AMC had one brand, one dramatically smaller dealer network, and one shot to get this right. For a while, AMC tried to play catch-up quietly, testing the waters rather than diving in headfirst. They rolled out the Rambler Rebel as an all-new mid-size platform in 1967, and started offering increasingly potent weight options through the Rebel SST trim. They also introduced the AMX, a genuinely interesting two-seat performance coupe, and the Javelin, a pony car aimed squarely at the Mustang and Camaro. There was even a wild one-off collaboration in 1969 called the Hearst SC Rambler, a compact car stuffed with a 390 cubic inch V8 and finished in a shockingly loud red, white, and blue paint scheme, built specifically to prove AMC could hang with the big engines if it wanted to. These were AMC's warning shots. None of them were the main event, but all of them were quietly building towards something bigger. By late 1969, AMC executives had grown tired of watching from the sidelines while Ford, GM, and Chrysler dominated every headline in the performance car world. They wanted a genuine statement piece, something loud enough, both literally and figuratively, to force people to take the smallest car company in Detroit seriously. So they turned to an outside partner with serious performance credibility of its own, Hearst Performance, the same company famous for building some of the era's best aftermarket shifters and for helping other manufacturers develop specialty performance models. Together, AMC and Hearst took the existing Rebel SST platform and turned it into something almost unrecognizable from AMC's usual conservative image. Stop and think about how unusual that partnership actually was. Hearst had already worked with Oldsmobile on the Hearst Oldie and with other manufacturers looking to inject some excitement into otherwise ordinary models. For AMC, bringing in a respected outside performance name wasn't just an engineering decision, it was a credibility play, a way of telling skeptical buyers that this wasn't just marketing spin from a company known for economy cars. Real specialists had been involved. Under the hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8 with 10-to-1 compression. rated at 340 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque, the most powerful engine American Motors had ever offered for sale up to that point. It came paired with a Hurst-linked 4-speed manual transmission running through a heavy-duty Borg-Warner TN gearbox, or optionally a 3-speed automatic for buyers who wanted the power without the clutch pedal. A functional ram air hood scoop fed cold air directly into the engine, and instead of hiding the car's performance intent, AMC leaned all the way into it, mounting a large tachometer directly on top of the hood itself, positioned so the driver could see engine RPM through the windshield without ever glancing down at the dashboard. Then came the part nobody could ignore. AMC painted the car in a bold red, white, and blue livery, an unapologetically patriotic paint scheme that turned the car into a rolling statement and gave it a name that matched the attitude perfectly. They simply called it the Machine. AMC didn't quietly ship this car to dealerships and hope people noticed. They staged an entrance. The Machine made its public debut at the National Hot Rod Association's World Championship Drag Race Finals in Dallas, Texas on October 25, 1969, choosing the most performance-obsessed audience in the country as the very first people to lay eyes on it. 10 machines, 5 with 4-speed manuals and 5 with automatics, were driven directly from AMC's factory in Kenosha, Wisconsin, all the way down to Dallas, and 4 of them were actually raced at the event in front of the crowd. The rest were paraded around the track for spectators to get a good look at, with promotional models waving alongside them, even running on street tires that had just survived over 1,000 miles of highway driving to get there, completely unprepared for competition. The machines consistently pulled off 0 to 60 times in the low 6-second range, and quarter-mile runs around 14.5 seconds at roughly 94 miles an hour. For a car built by the company everyone assumed only made sensible family sedans, that kind of performance, right out of the gate, on tires that had just driven cross-country, turned heads immediately. And once independent road testers got their hands on production versions, the numbers held up in exactly the way that should have terrified AMC's much larger rivals in period testing. A Rebel Machine, running a 4-speed manual with 3.91 rear gears, posted a quarter-mile time of 14.49 seconds at 93 miles an hour. That doesn't sound like a jaw-dropping number in isolation until you put it side by side with what it was actually beating. That time was quicker than a Chevrolet Chevelle SS 396, quicker than a standard Oldsmobile 442, and quicker than a range of similarly priced muscle cars from Detroit's actual giants. Think about what that means for a second. This wasn't some exotic limited-run halo car built without any regard for cost. This was AMC's practical, mid-size family platform, wearing a patriotic paint job, built by a company that couldn't afford a fraction of the racing budget General Motors had, and it was walking away from GM's own performance cars on the same stretch of asphalt, somewhere inside General Motors' headquarters. Engineers who had access to virtually unlimited budgets, dedicated racing divisions, and decades of institutional performance knowledge were being quietly outrun by a car built by a company most Americans associated with reliable, forgettable family sedans. But AMC wasn't finished squeezing performance out of this thing, and this is where the story gets even more interesting, because the factory car was really just the starting point. Through AMC's dealer network, buyers could access something called the Group 19 Parts Program, a catalog of factory-engineered performance upgrades sold directly through AMC dealerships. Everything from headers to camshafts to rear gear sets. And for buyers who genuinely wanted to push things to the edge, AMC offered a specific $500 service kit through dealers that could push output to well over 400 horsepower. With that kit installed, an otherwise stock-looking Rebel Machine could reportedly run the quarter mile in the mid-12-second range, numbers that would have been taken seriously even against genuine factory drag package cars from Detroit's biggest performance divisions. A company everyone assumed only built sensible transportation had quietly created a legitimate street-legal drag weapon, sitting right there in dealer showrooms, waiting for anyone brave enough to check the option box. So by every measure that mattered on paper and on the drag strip, the Machine delivered exactly what AMC had promised, which makes what happened next feel almost unfair. Because for all its genuine performance credibility, the Machine ran directly into a problem that had nothing to do with horsepower or quarter-mile times. It ran into AMC's own business model. Remember, AMC's entire identity was built around undercutting the big three on price. That's how the company survived for 2 decades. But the Machine broke that formula completely. It carried a base price of $3,475, which put it noticeably above several of the very muscle cars it was specifically designed to beat. buyers walking into a showroom looking for genuine bang for their buck. The exact customer AMC had spent years cultivating suddenly found themselves being asked to pay a premium for a car from a brand that had built its entire reputation on being the affordable option. It's a strange kind of irony. AMC built a car powerful enough to beat GM's muscle cars, and then priced it in a way that worked against the very reason people bought AMC vehicles in the first place. And here's a detail that most retellings of this story get slightly wrong, or at least oversimplify. Nobody agrees, even now, more than 50 years later, on exactly how many Rebel machines AMC actually built. The National American Motors Drivers and Racers Association puts the number at 1,936 cars. The Rebel Machine Registry, a separate group of dedicated owners and researchers, insists the real number is 2,326. AMC itself never kept detailed enough production records to settle the argument. And at this point, historians widely agree the true figure will probably never be definitively known. What both totals agree on, though, is that production came in far below what AMC had originally hoped for, a clear signal that pricing, not performance, was what held this car back from real commercial success. And then, almost as quickly as it arrived, it was gone. From the very beginning, the machine had actually been designed as a one-year-only proposition. The entire Rebel model line, the platform underneath this car, was already scheduled to be discontinued at the end of the 1970 model year, replaced for 1971 by a completely different, far less exciting model called the Matador. AMC never intended the machine to become a long-running nameplate the way the GTO or the Charger became. It was built to make one loud, unmistakable statement and then quietly disappear, almost like AMC had used every bit of engineering energy it had for one specific moment, and then had nothing left to sustain it going forward. For decades after that, the machine largely faded from public memory, exactly the kind of forgotten footnote you'd expect from a company most people don't even remember existed. Collectors and muscle car historians consistently describe it as one of the single most overlooked performance cars of its entire era, routinely passed over by casual enthusiasts in favor of far more famous names, Mustangs, Pontiac GTOs, and Hemi-powered Chargers and Cudas that dominate magazine covers and auction headlines to this day. For a very long time, if you mentioned the Rebel Machine to even a serious classic car person, there was a real chance they'd have no idea what you were talking about. AMC itself didn't survive long enough to keep the story alive either. The company limped through the 1970s and early 1980s before eventually being absorbed by Chrysler in 1987, meaning there was no parent company left standing to fund nostalgia campaigns, throwback editions, or anniversary specials, the way Chevrolet, Ford, and Dodge have done for their own muscle car legends for decades. When AMC disappeared, so did most of the institutional memory that might have kept the machine's story circulating. But here's the twist that makes this story worth telling right now in the present day. That obscurity hasn't lasted. Values for surviving Rebel machines have been climbing steadily as collectors rediscover just how genuinely potent and genuinely rare this car actually is. Based on recent auction data, these cars now average somewhere around $72,000 to $76,000 at sale, with the current recorded high watermark sitting at $145,750 achieved at a Mecum auction in May of 2022. For a car that dealers once struggled to move off the lot at $3,475 because it was priced too high for its own brand identity. That's an almost unbelievable reversal of fortune. And maybe that's the real lesson buried inside this whole story. The Rebel Machine was never beaten by a faster car. It was never out-engineered on the drag strip. It lost the fight. It was never actually built to survive in the first place. A battle against its own manufacturer's identity, against pricing strategy, against the sheer marketing weight of three companies with budgets AMC could never hope to match. The smallest, poorest, least respected car company in Detroit built something genuinely capable of humiliating General Motors and Ford on their own turf. And it did exactly that on paper, on the drag strip, and in period road tests that have survived to this day. It just never had the size, the marketing muscle, or the brand prestige to make sure anyone outside the drag strip actually noticed. Over 50 years later, as collectors finally start paying real money to own one, the Rebel Machine is finally getting a small, overdue piece of the recognition it earned the moment it rolled off that trailer in Dallas, Texas, back in October of 1969.